Day 18. Bought in. I offer 3 levels of service. I call them bronze, silver and gold. Bronze is $2,000, silver 3, and gold is 5, but then I cover absolutely everything. There's someone else I call in to help with that, but he's covered in that full price, soup to nuts. Gary wasn't even sure about 2,000, but then he had no idea about what he was doing at all. He took in the scene as if he had just been dropped into it for the first time. He was sitting at this man's kitchen table in the suburbs. The units were clean but worn, a bit like everything he had seen of the house after being welcomed in. The place was well looked after, but there was clearly no desire to update anything, despite being a good 20 years past its prime. Gary could see new houses going up across the way through the kitchen window. This one was a holdout. This man was a holdout. He was almost a neighbour of Gary's. He'd been surprised to learn there was someone like this living so close. He had assumed he would have to go to London or get someone from halfway around the world on the dark web, but no, this guy was practically around the corner. He was in his late 60s, and Gary guessed a widower, absolutely the last person he would expect. When you say everything, what do you mean? The man's eyes rolled a little as he tried to find a clearer way of describing everything. Perhaps he didn't have newbies often. Well, I research the target, plan the whole operation alone so you can be completely hands-off. I do the deed in a fully discreet way and dispose of the body. That's where my contact comes in. And there's no trace. The gold package might be thought of as complete disappearance. Ultimately, the police have to rule that the person is just lost, technically not a crime. Gary thought this was someone you didn't want to argue with. Not because he was scary, far from it, just because he seemed the type that rarely heard people say he was wrong, or didn't listen if they did. It's a lot to take in. It is, and I still hold you to no obligations, of course, apart from your discretion. A condition of actually meeting in person was the understanding that should Gary go to the police or expose the killer in some way, he himself would become fair game. Gary didn't want to meet. He'd assumed this was something that could be handled on WhatsApp, but the older man had insisted. It was an insurance policy. He seemed to read Gary's mind. I know it's not ideal, but it's worked for me all these years. Are you sure you don't want a cup of tea or something? Gary didn't know what he was sure of. He couldn't be sure where he would get the money from, if this guy was someone he could trust not to arrest him in the next 5 minutes or put a bullet in his head as soon as he turned around. He'd never so much as hurt a fly. He pictured his wife. He saw her face when they'd first met at that conference. She'd looked so young, and when he had genuinely asked her about herself over coffee during a break, he had been genuinely shocked to find out she was single. She'd been so flattered by that. He couldn't believe his luck. The woman was brilliant, truly. She saw things no one else could. She had superpowers. She climbed the company they both worked at like a flight of shallow steps. No one stood a chance, least of all Gary. When they had met, he was technically her superior, but she slingshotted herself past him so quickly, he barely even noticed. He barely noticed when she convinced him it would make more sense that he stay at home to look after a baby that never came, hardly made a peep when what was left of his money became hers. The last few years of his life had disappeared into loneliness. He had no friends anymore. His family had given up inviting him for Christmas. Meeting this retiree in front of him was the longest he had sat alone with another man in months, and the thought made him want to cry. He wished he had that cup of tea now, to hide his face behind. The man looked uncomfortable. "I'll tell you what, would you like to see what I use? I don't normally do this for clients, let alone prospective clients, but I suspect you might find it interesting." "All right," said Gary, wrangling the crack in his voice. The man stood up and pulled a bunch of keys from his pocket. Gary was slightly unnerved to see him stooping a little as he walked. Sitting for so long must have made him stiff, as he straightened up a little by the time he reached the cupboard under the stairs. He opened the door to reveal a smaller metal cabinet, keeping the vacuum cleaner, ironing board and assorted hangers company. He turned a key in 2 locks, one top, one bottom, and opened the narrow door on an ordered array of 4 or 5 guns, standing upright and shiny. "These are the tools of the trade. I'm particularly fond of this one. I've had it since, 1985. "You own these legally?" Gary asked. "Oh, yes, of course. The local firearms officer knows all about them. I keep them all for sport." He winked. "In fact, it all works out rather well. I choose whichever will be best for a job, and then I take it down to the club and get some practice in for a couple of hours a few days before I do it. The police track ammunition purchases, but they've got no real way of keeping an eye on how much you use. This way, I've always been firing a load at targets the same week I need to use it for a client. And I don't like to blow my own trumpet, but, well, that usually only takes 1 round anyway." "You use all these rifles to kill people?" Gary hesitantly waved his arms at the weapons. "Well, not these 2. They're shotguns, not rifles, obviously," said the man, obviously. "So, come on, what's it going to be? Are you in or not? It's a big decision, but those are what make up life." The man looked at Gary, apparently waiting to see if he should close the gun cabinet or not.